There's something you're very good at, and it keeps producing nothing. You know the thing. It's the skill you've spent years sharpening, the quality you lead with, the one you're quietly proud of. And in most rooms, it works. It's why you're proud of it. But there's a place in your life where you keep bringing that same weapon, swinging it with everything you have and getting back almost nothing. A wall that doesn't move, a person who doesn't respond, a situation that absorbs your best effort like it was never there. And when it fails, you have exactly one idea. Try harder, sharpen it further, swing again. You'll swing forever and that wall will not move, because the problem was never how sharp you are. I want to show you what I mean, because it happened on a football pitch this week in front of 100 million people, and it's the cleanest example I've seen in years. France came into the World Cup semifinal, ranked the best team on earth, carrying the most expensive attacking line in the sport. The favorites, unstoppable for a month. They took 10 shots at Spain's goal. They lost 2-0, and here's the number that should stop you cold. By the measure analysts use to judge the quality of a chance, France generated 0.3 expected goals. 0.3 from 10 attempts. The sharpest spear in football struck the shield 10 separate times and barely scratched the paint. And they weren't starved of the ball. Possession was almost even. They had the ball. They had the shots. They had, on paper, the best players in the world. And none of it mattered. That's not a football story. That's the oldest problem in strategy, and it was written down 2,300 years ago in China by a philosopher so cold about power that historians call him the Chinese Machiavelli, except he came 1,500 years before Machiavelli was born. His name was Han Fei, and he told a story about a spear and a shield that explains exactly why the most talented team on earth couldn't score, and exactly why your best weapon keeps bouncing off. That's what we do here, by the way. We take the oldest strategic minds in the world, the ones who spent their lives studying how power and money and people actually work, and we use them on the problems you're facing right now. Ancient answers to modern walls. If that sounds useful, subscribe. We're just getting started. Now, Han Fei's story. It's short and it's devastating. In the state of Chu, a man sold weapons in the market. He held up a shield and told the crowd it was so strong that nothing in the world could pierce it. Then he held up a spear and told them it was so sharp that there was nothing in the world it could not pierce. And someone in the crowd asked him one question. What happens if I take your spear and strike your shield? The merchant said nothing, because there was nothing to say. That story is so famous in China that the word for contradiction in Chinese is literally spear shield. 2,500 years later, an entire language still carries the memory of a man who couldn't answer a question in a market. But most people take the wrong lesson from it. They think it's a story about a liar, a merchant caught exaggerating. It isn't. Han Fei was making a far colder point, and it's the point that killed France. His point was this: absolute sharpness and absolute hardness cannot both exist, not because the merchant was dishonest, but because there is no such thing as absolute strength at all. Nothing is sharp. Things are sharp relative to something else. Nothing is strong. Things are strong relative to something else. The moment you say unstoppable, you've made a claim that holds only until it meets the one specific thing that stops it. France's front line was not sharp. France's front line was sharp against everyone they had faced so far. Against this particular shape, this particular structure, this particular opponent, it was, for 90 minutes, an ordinary spear. 0.3 says it plainly. The sharpness was never a property of the spear. It was a property of the matchup. And the matchup changed. Sit with that, because it applies to you far more than it applies to any footballer. Your best quality is not absolutely good. It is good against certain opponents, in certain situations, on certain ground. Put it against the wrong structure and it produces 0.3, 10 attempts, nothing to show. And you'll stand there like the merchant in the market with no answer, wondering how something so sharp did so little. Pause for a second and think about that wall in your life, the place where your best quality keeps producing nothing. Now consider that it isn't a verdict on your worth. It's a matchup problem. One word for how that lands: hold it. Because most people, when the spear fails, only ever have one idea: sharpen the spear. That is the trap. And it's exactly the trap France walked into. Their mistake wasn't quality. It was a decision about where to fight. Spain had built a structure so drilled they'd conceded one goal in 6 matches. That structure was thickest in the center, in the shape, in the collective. And France spent 90 minutes attacking the shield, exactly where the shield was thickest, 10 times, 0.3. Now, Han Fei can show you the paradox, but Han Fei never tells you how to win it. He wasn't a general. He was a philosopher of power, and his job was to strip away your illusions, not hand you a plan. For the plan, you need a different mind, a soldier. Written a century or so earlier, in the book The West Knows Better Than Any Other Chinese Text, The Art of War, Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu's answer to the spear and shield problem is one of the most useful sentences ever written about conflict. Avoid what is strong and strike at what is weak. Read that again because it sounds obvious and almost nobody does it. Every opponent, every system, every problem has a strong point and an empty point. The shield is not a sphere. It has an edge. It has a place where it simply is not. And victory, Sun Tzu argued, does not belong to the sharpest weapon. It belongs to whoever finds the emptiness and strikes there instead. And history has never given a cleaner demonstration of that than the Maginot Line. After the First World War, France built what was, at the time, the most formidable defensive fortification on Earth. Kilometers of concrete and steel along the German border, underground railways, artillery emplacements, barracks buried in the rock. It was, by any technical measure, close to impenetrable, a shield so strong that the merchant of Chu would have been proud to sell it, and it worked exactly as designed. It was never broken by a frontal assault. It also didn't matter at all, because in 1940 the German advance didn't attack it. They came through the Ardennes, dense forest to the north that the French had judged too difficult for a major armored push, and had therefore left thinly defended. The Germans went around. Within weeks, France had fallen, and the greatest shield ever built was sitting there, fully intact, guarding a border the war had simply declined to cross. That is the whole lesson in one image. The Maginot Line was never defeated. It was made irrelevant. Nobody outfought it. Somebody looked at it and asked a better question than, "How do we break this?" They asked, "Where is this thing not?" And here's the part that should make the hair stand up on your neck. In 1940, France built the strongest shield in the world and lost because the enemy refused to strike it head-on. In 2026, France brought the sharpest spear in the world and lost because they refused to do anything except strike head-on. Same country, opposite weapons. The identical mistake, believing that the contest happens where you expect it to. Sun Tzu had a second line, and it's the one that explains both defeats. The skilled commander brings the enemy to the ground of his choosing and is not brought to the enemy's. That is the whole game, not who is stronger. Whose ground are we standing on? Spain's real achievement in that semi-final wasn't defending. It was making France play a match that suited Spain. Every French shot was taken from a place Spain was willing to allow a shot. France weren't outfought. They were outlocated, and you do this constantly. You argue on the terms your opponent set. You compete where the incumbent is strongest. You try to beat someone at the exact thing they're best at, because winning there feels like the real victory. It isn't. It's vanity. Choosing to fight where your enemy is strong isn't courage. It's a failure of imagination dressed up as honor. Business runs on this same shape. Blockbuster had thousands of stores and an enormous shield of retail dominance. When streaming arrived, they defended the ground they knew. Netflix never attacked the stores at all. They struck where there was no shield, because the shield had been built for a different war. Kodak invented the digital camera and buried it to protect the thickest part of their own defenses. Both were magnificent Maginot lines. Both were walked around. So what is the actual answer to Han Fei's paradox? What happens when the sharpest spear meets the strongest shield? The answer is that the wrong question was asked. The merchant had no reply because the question itself was a trap. It assumed the contest must happen head-on, strength against strength. And in that framing, someone always loses, and it's usually the one who believed their own marketing. The real answer is that you never let the spear meet the shield at all. You don't sharpen the spear further. You don't test whether your strength is finally big enough. You change where the strike lands. You move the battlefield. You find the ground the shield was never built to cover. The Ardennes that everyone agreed was too difficult to bother defending, and you strike there with a weapon that might look far less impressive, against a defense that was never designed for it. That is how the weaker force wins, not by becoming the stronger force, by refusing the contest that was offered. So let's go back to that wall of yours. Your best thing, producing nothing, again and again. You were never lacking sharpness. You were fighting on prepared ground against a shield built for exactly your weapon and calling the result a verdict on your worth. It wasn't. 0.3 doesn't mean you're not good. It means you struck the thickest part of the shield 10 times and never once went looking for the edge. So don't think about how to sharpen your spear. Think about who you're becoming, not the merchant in the market, insisting his weapon is unstoppable right up until someone asks the one question he can't answer. Someone who looks at a wall and before swinging asks the only question that has ever mattered: where is this thing not? And here's the thing, Han Fei and Sun Tzu were part of an entire generation of Chinese minds who mapped how power, conflict, and human nature actually work. The merchants who built fortunes by refusing the crowd. The strategists who toppled kingdoms without raising a sword. We're decoding every one of them, one mind at a time. If this showed you even one place where you've been striking the strongest part of the shield, then you already understand why most people will spend their whole lives sharpening a spear that was never the problem. A few will move the battlefield instead. Decide which one you are.